Thank you, Bethany. It's my pleasure to now introduce our keynote, Loretta Parham. Loretta is the CEO and Director of the Atlanta University Center Robert W. Woodruff Library, an independent academic library that serves 4 historically Black colleges and universities. Prior to AUC, Loretta directed the Hampton University Harvey Library, served as the Deputy Director of the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh, and served as District Chief of 20 urban branch libraries for the Chicago Public Library. She has also served on many influential leadership roles on a variety of committees and boards, including at the Georgia Humanities Council, ACRL, ALA, OCLC, and the Oberlin Group Consortium. Loretta received her MLS from the University of Michigan School of Information, which honored her last year with its Distinguished Alumni Award. Earlier this year, she was named the 2017 Academic Research Librarian of the Year by the Association of Colleges and Research Libraries. Loretta is a founding co-director and founding board chair of the Historically Black Colleges and Universities Library Alliance. I've had the pleasure of knowing Loretta for almost 2 decades now. Let me say to everyone that she is a hardworking woman and committed to the HBCU community and librarianship, as evidenced by the various leadership roles she assumes. She is also a very delightful person. She loves laughter. She is a willing mentor and a distinguished library leader. It is my pleasure to present to some and introduce to others Mrs. Loretta Parham.
Thank you. Oh, there are my dots. 7 dots for sale here, okay. All right. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you so very much. If you ever want to feel good, have Sandra Phoenix introduce you. I tell you, it's just, she's marvelous. All right. I'm trying to get organized here, and it's not working with that darn watch, so we'll let it go. I hope I'm brief enough. So, well, welcome to this conference. And I must say, I arrived last night about 10:30 p.m. from Portland, Oregon, where the Oberlin Group is had its annual meeting. And one of the topics of great discussion there, among all of the very basic things that we all have to regard, was the continuous, ongoing effort to diversify our libraries, our profession, our schools, etc. So how refreshing it is to look upon this audience and see that it is such a very rich and diversified audience. Doesn't happen often in our industry, but congratulations to DLF and of course to the HBCU Library Alliance. When I woke last Sunday morning on October 15th, I first checked the time and then my email, the work email, and the personal email, and then next I checked Facebook, as those of us in this older baby boomer generation tend to still do. Thanks to Jim Neal, our current president of ALA, who one might think really has far too much time on his hand because he is just able to consume information and distribute information in a rapid and kind of rapid fire way. But he consistently shares with us. He forwarded a link to a USA Today careers article that was citing the 8 jobs that will not exist in 2030. I don't know if anyone saw that article. In this article, it listed the following jobs: social media manager, word processor. I haven't seen a word processor since like the 80s, okay? Travel agent, telemarketer, receptionist, cashier, paper boy, paper girl. And at the top of this very historic list, I want to say, was the number one job that won't exist in 2030, being the librarian. Yes, I know. The rationale for the listing of the librarian position seemed only to be based upon the surveyed public and their dislike for books and their preference for e-books. So we have some messaging issues. The position of social media manager, which was number 8 on the list, was justified with reasoning that said the popularity of social media itself will force out the managers because the public is becoming expert in using media. Sounds all too familiar. True enough, our environment is changed, and it is still changing. John Palfrey and Urs Gasser, in their book, Born Digital, said that libraries are focused on the pool of traditional knowledge, books, journals, case studies, etc., and should focus more on helping others to manage the rivers of digital information that they encounter every day. This change in mindset means something has to change, and much more quickly in our libraries and information centers than it currently is. Those rivers, that drowning of information that is characteristic of the digital age, demands a librarian, a professional that is current in the industry knowledge, fluent in communications, and knowledgeable of any of a number of specialty hard skills. So much for the generalist going forward. It is less about integration of technology and more about helping students and faculty of the academy to stay abreast, afloat, and swim vigorously down those rivers of digital information in order to thrive. As technology changes, so does the audience and constituents we are meant to serve. We know about the baby boomers, those wonderful baby boomers, and we know about the millennials. But who is this new generation of learners that will land on our doorsteps in 4 or 5 years? Some people are referring to them as Generation I, some people are calling them Generation Z. But it is a group that is approaching our steps, and from all indications, they will certainly require a different agenda and a different methodology for the delivery of information services. But before they arrive, we will want to consider what we need to do to prepare. So when you talk about this academic library of the future going forward, I'm also taken by the article that was prepared by David Lewis, where he talked about the expert library, staffing, sustaining, and advancing the academic library in the 21st century. David and I agree on a lot of things, but we certainly agree on these things for sure. From his book, he promotes the things that should be done now if the academic library is to remain essential. From his book about reimagining the academic library, In that book, he says things such as we need to retire our legacy print collections now. We should be able to continue our reliance, those of us in smaller and medium institutions for sure, should be able to continue our reliance on the research libraries that continue to commit their resources for storage and access to legacy print collections. We need to develop a space plan once we create that, clear those print legacy collections, reduce the floor space for shelving, and have a clear strategy for repurposing that space in a way that continues to demonstrate our value as an engaged member of the Academy. We need to make sure that our materials budgets, that we have a strategy in place to manage the changing business model that's related to publishing. And we need to be able to support the local scholarly content, its creation, its access, and its preservation. We need to commit to special collections and make the investment in the staff, the collections, the process, and systems. This is like number 1 on my list of priorities at my institution for a number of reasons. Most importantly, because it's about our responsibility, our opportunity to preserve what has occurred and to preserve what is being created today. We need to infuse the curriculum with our knowledge and skills for locating, using, and evaluating information. We need to know our library demographics. We need to know who is working at the library. We need to know what are their skill sets and their qualifications, and then we need to hire the talent that is needed to fill the gaps. We need to get the library's culture right. The library organization should be prepared to change, innovate, take risk, and deal with failures. And we should have a plan in place, a proactive plan for library operations. This is a responsibility for leadership and for managers. So who are these, this next group of learners that we're talking about? I'll pause for a moment just to say a little bit about who they are. This Generation Z, and I won't read the charts. Can everyone see the charts from the rear, please? Okay. The Generation Z, I mean, here you have the groups, the traditionalists, you know, that was, you know, my husband, my brother, and they really do fit this mold very well. There are the baby boomers, Generation X, the millennials, who I must say get a lot of bad publicity. You need to get a new marketing program together. And then Generation Z. These are the children that are in some of our homes. I have two granddaughters who live with me, and they are 11 and 13 years old, born in 2004 and 2006. Well, I mean, it's like this is the gift from the God of information and technology for me, because they have really wakened my eyes and my ears to so much. So I understand this Generation Z. It is very, very real. This Generation Z has had disruptive technologies as part of their life. Disruptive technologies is the norm for them. Whereas most of us have spent time and effort trying to get used to that last disruptive technology. You know, and while we were getting used to that, something else occurred and passed us by. But for them, they anticipate this. This is the norm. I think there's just an expectation that what we have today will not be the same in 6 months. There are traits to this generation which I think are particularly important to those of us in our libraries and information centers. The 7 traits of the one author, not Ben Sass, wrong book. I forget the author's name. If you ask me later on, I'll tell you. But the traits that he characterized are here. He referred to them as being phygital. That's because they are physical and digital. They always have things in their hands. That's the physical aspect. But those things are there to identify, enhance, and to distribute to the world their own personal brand and exchange of information. They can characterize as hyper-custom. They expect the world to customize for them. They have always had retailers and friends who are responding to their needs and their behaviors. You know, for example, the Amazons, the Instagrams, the Googles, et cetera. Excuse me. In college, they will want to customize their experience, picking a degree, determining how to complete that degree. These are the generation that might be a little resistant to the core requirement. They stop and learn as needed. They hit pause and they play and hit play based upon the rate of comprehension for a given task. They are realistic. This generation, unfortunately, has had on a regular basis lockdown drills for active shooters and for terrorism. This has happened in their homes and online. When I was a child, our drill was for tornadoes. It's quite a different life experience. This generation sees the result of protecting things. They see the result of protecting, and so they're very sensitive to climate warming, lead in water. They see that experience, as in Flint, Michigan, chemicals in food, and they have never seen the government collaborate. So collaboration is a foreign entity, really, in terms of the expectation from, one would say, your role models, your seniors, et cetera. Life is real to them, and they don't want to wander in the land of possibility. As baby boomers, we told our children anything is possible. You go forth. Yes, you can be anything you want. The Xers told their Zers that, well, yes, anything's possible, but it won't be easy. But the Xers tell the Zers that it won't be easy, I'm sorry. And diversity is interpreted very differently for the millennials as well as the Zers, as it is more real in their worlds than it has been in prior generations. FOMO, they have a fear of missing out. This is characterized by the perpetual swiping of the phone screen to check for incoming information. Some of you may be victims of this habit already. I know I am. Checking for friend chats, grades, and teacher feedback. I'm going back to these grandchildren. These grandchildren I have, they are in 5th grade and 7th grade, and they have these iPads, and I'm just in a daze. There's no homework comes home, and how they check the work, everything is on the iPad. All their work must be submitted through the iPad, but the teacher comments come electronically. I cannot tell you, and I consider myself a somewhat intelligent person. The challenge I had at this school of trying to figure out this communication model that the school used to let parents know what was going on. I went to the school and I begged for an orientation. It's just a whole different world. And when you're caught in the middle of it, as many of us are, particularly as the professionals in this industry, it can be very awkward. It can be very disconcerting. This Generation Z, they call them we economists because they're used to a sharing industry, sharing of goods and services. So you think about, these comments, these traits, I want to suggest we need to think about them, what that means in the information spot. But they're used to sharing, and it makes sense to them. It's better to share since we don't all need to own the same thing. So Ecomodal, Airbnb, Uber, all of these things are life examples for them. They look at everything as do-it-yourself. The Xers, they didn't trust, the Xers, Generation X, the generation before this generation, did not trust institutions to do things after watching so many of them fail. And they believe the smartest thing was not to rely upon someone else, but to do it themselves. So homeschooling, consequently, really, really accelerated under the energy of the Generation Xer parents. And so, for example, between 2003 and 2012, homeschooling grew by more than 60% in this country. So nearly half of the Generation Z, nearly half of this group surveyed said they would rather complete a project on their own and get recognition for that work rather than being in a group and sharing the recognition. So much for group study. And finally, driven. The participation award means little or nothing to Gen Zs. Reality is a factor. Zers understand winning and losing, but they want to know why they lose so that they can win the next time. They have not had to grow up to technology. They grew up with technology. They didn't have to accept it as we did. They expect it. As soon as they think they have mastered something, they are ready to move on. Video games where you master and then move to the next level, etc. And they need to achieve. Continuing the list, the academic library must sell the change that's necessary. We have to share the success with our stakeholders and do it repeatedly. In another article, as I was speaking about that, the vocabulary has changed. I will note that the vocabulary has changed before I go on to this other article. And so on the left are just some of the words that some of us are most acquainted with, in terms of our workplace terminology, catalog, circulation, access, the telephone, books, bibliography, my favorite word. I cannot tell you how many times I've used that word to confuse people outside of our profession and convince them why we needed more money for bibliographic purposes. It really sounds impressive. But there's a newer vocabulary now, and I think it's probably a little small, and some of newer vocabulary, digital, internet, learning technologies, mobile, remote, virtual, social media, crowdsourcing, mixed reality, artificial intelligence, big data, Wi-Fi, innovation directors, search, discovery, cloud storage, preservation, on and on. The vocabulary is changing. I was in University of Michigan a couple weeks ago for their bicentennial symposium, and I must tell you, I had the opportunity to take a look at the curriculum that is being offered there. While it is very exciting and very wonderful, and probably a wonderful challenge and will be very rewarding for the students who complete that program, for me it was absolutely terrifying. I didn't know what the hell that stuff was. What's being learned, what's on the curriculum in our information schools and library schools is vastly different from what it has been. And it continues to change, I believe, in their effort, one, to stay current, to generate, excuse me, to be able to generate numbers in terms of recruitment and retention, but also just in terms of making sure to graduate students who will be successful in the workplace. The disappointing part of that conversation was that for several of the students that I spoke to, and I said, oh, so what are you going to do when you graduate? Waiting for someone to say, oh, I'm going to go to such and such a library. I'm going to do this. Not one, maybe one out of about 6 or 7 students that I spoke with mentioned that they were planning to apply to a library. Many of those students were headed to the corporate sector. So, that says a lot about what we need to do a better job of in terms of communicating the value of and the importance and the place of library in our lives, for sure. It also suggests how the world is changing and what we're really going to need in our workplaces. And I'll say more about that in one moment. There is, I'm not out of order, yeah. There is, in this article that I referred to about the workforce, there are some driving trends that are being suggested, that are being suggested for things that we need to do for the library's very most important asset, which is its staff. One of those is a change in the mix of library staffing. So as we begin to embrace these trends and prepare for delivery of information services for this new generation of learners, the mix of library staffing will need to change. And the trends are reflecting that we are having fewer support staff, fewer student staff, and more professional staff. The trends also suggest that there is a change in the mix of professional staff. So that we need more staff with special skills, technical, hard skills, fewer generalists, and perhaps, most certainly, more professional staff, but without the MLS. And of course, there's always a trend of aging in the positions of librarian. The greatest impact on this aging, on this structure, will be in 2020, they say, 3 years from now, when folks like me will probably have retired and moved on to some island in the Caribbean and requested interlibrary loan from you. The trend also is very important that leadership must be candid. We really have to look in the mirror now and come out of our denial modes. Now, I'm going to say something I don't say often out loud because, I'm always afraid of being stoned. But I'm not quite as optimistic about the future of the library as we know it today as perhaps some of you are. That does not mean I do not hold it dear in value. That does not mean that I don't see its place. What I want to suggest is that the library as I know it today cannot exist tomorrow. It has to change. We have to continue to evolve so that we can best reflect the needs and the relevancies within our communities. We have to also find the funds to pay the salaries that will be demanded by this mix of professional staff. So once again, several of our information and library schools are now what's coming back to the surface after years of the association pushing it down, is the awarding of bachelor degrees in information science. This is the terminology, and I'll use Michigan again as an example, only because I was just there a couple weeks ago. They are offering the Bachelor of Information Science. It is the program which, number one, is the most diverse program they have. And it is the program that I think, when I think about the needs in my library, the new staff that I need to bring in, one of those students from that Bachelor of Information Science will be just the right thing in several positions. But they will demand money because that group of students, those graduates, will be able to go to corporate sector, and corporate sector will pay them. They will start out at $65,000, $75,000. I don't know about you, but we don't start that high. It's also important that a trend that's happening is the need to be more generous with support of staff development. So if I can't afford to hire that graduate from the master's program who is now in such hot demand and has all these special hardwired skill sets that I need if I'm going to respond and deliver in this digital environment, then I need to find ways to try and grow my own, and we're all familiar with that. I think it starts with us being flexible or continuing to be flexible and very open and about staff development and professional development. In our institution some years ago, we needed to have someone who knew something about instructional design. We had no one. So what we did pay for 2 librarians to get their certificates in instructional design from a reputable accredited institution, so that we had that expertise, and which also kind of made us look a little better in the eyes of the participating faculty because we could speak their language a little clearer now. I think it is a challenge for leadership to motivate those who are not so motivated to engage and to train and to be developed. And it's a requirement because in many cases, that group might outsize the number of staff who are willing for the additional training and staff development. It's extremely important that we pay attention, I'll be repetitive, to staff development and training. And I don't mean the one-off workshops. I mean something that has long-lasting and sustained impact on the skill set that the individual can bring to the workplace. And we certainly want to be able to accommodate the difference in work-life balances and the need for meaningful and exciting work. Staff in this new age, the young staff, many of you here, one thing I know is that the talented staff, and particularly the millennials, need exciting projects. You guys get bored like really easily. And so leadership has to find things and find ways to bring you on and not rely upon the tried and true or the senior staff all the time for the delivery of services, for innovation and for ideas. And we certainly need to be very clear about our strategies for recruitment, retention, and development of staff. So our negotiations to recruit them need to be flexible. You know, your HR department will hate you, but we need to be sure we are providing appropriate orientation. We need to be sure that we are offering mentoring. We need to be sure that we are evaluating on a regular basis. The new generation, the younger generation of staffing, I believe, really likes to have feedback. And it needs to be continuous and ongoing. You know, I think I was at something, and there was a lady that was a woman that was speaking, and she was head of Girl Scouts in some city. I don't know where I was. And she said when she came on board, she got rid of the performance evaluation instrument and tool. I was like, oh God, I'd love to do that. The tool. She got rid of the tool and the annual process of sitting down with Jane Doe, who I probably haven't talked to in months, and evaluating them on their work. Instead, she put in place a process, and perhaps many of you have this in your workplace. She put in place a process where the managers were required to have not only staff meetings, but regular consultations with individual staff about their performance. And that this happened like I think she did it on every 3 weeks. She didn't do it monthly. She wanted to get it out of the cycle. Every 3 weeks. And it might have been a 15-minute, half-hour conversation. And she has found that that was far more valuable in terms of retention than the traditional vehicle, the instrument annual performance evaluation. Well, you might not be able to control that, and at your organizational level, you know, the HR department might say, no, we have to do this. And so that's fine. You always, you know, do the rules, follow policy. But there's nothing to say that we can't do something else in addition to policy and procedure. There's nothing to say we can't introduce something in the workplace that's going to be more stimulating, again, for purposes of retaining this staff that we have invested in now with development skills, and this staff that we've given special projects to. And it's extremely important, and this staff that's working on special projects, et cetera. And we should also have some clarity, not one offhand, but a lot of clarity about when the MLS is needed and when it is not for a job or for a task in the library. There are some very talented support staff paraprofessionals in our libraries who, I dare say, given the opportunity to deliver and contribute, might very well surprise some individuals. And I think that it's extremely important also to be able to manage the inevitable workplace tensions that will be created by this remixing of staff. I mean, I suspect that some of you in your seats now are like, what the heck is she talking about? There will be tensions, but if we are to continue to be relevant, if we are going to be able to deal with this Gen Z kid when they walk on our campus and our doors, if we have not been critical and stopped and paused and made some changes along the way, along with bringing the entire staff, contributing to a healthy morale environment rather than contributing to an unhealthy morale, then we're going to be hard pressed to demonstrate value, I would say. So we must plan, and we must do so with a seriousness that will enable us to respond to this changing landscape. We should not take for granted the value and purpose of the strategic plan. It's a familiar phrase and activity, and that all of us have heard and participated in, but as we know, the importance of the strategic plan is the implementation, evaluation, and ownership of the plan. When this is done, and when it's done consistently and by engaging the entire team of library workers, our chances of improvement are greatly improved. My library, the Widgers Library, is currently in its 4th plan, with the latest one on a schedule of 2015 to 2020. Originating from our strategic plan is a mandate for digital preservation. A digital preservation working group was authorized and tasked with the responsibility of establishing and maintaining policies and practices for long-term preservation and continued access of both born digital and digitized content. So the goal for our working group and for our institution over the next 3, now 2 years, is to create an infrastructure, that will enable us to select digital content that is appropriate for our infrastructure, service and users, provide a variety of levels of preservation based on format and priorities, enable access to content over time, use the best technical solutions and policies to authenticate digital content, use open software where possible, collaborate with others to minimize the duplication that can occur in this whole landscape, and contribute to the development of standards and best practices in the digital preservation community. The task is intense and requires new energies and new skills, and a level of innovation and risks to come forth from those staff engaged in this work. We have a plan that's been reviewed and assisted by a Jacopia in the name of Catherine Skinner, and the staff in the library's Archives Research Center, in the library's Collection Management Department, and in our newly formed Digital Services Department. They are joined at the hip as we transform operations to respond to the needs of our constituents, a response that must support faculty and student research and stimulate teaching and learning and the instruction the professional librarians provide. The digital preservation plan itself will, over the next few years, result in the conceptualization, the creation, selection, ingest, and preservation and evaluation of a strategy that promises to protect content for the foreseeable future. This is a huge deal. We are a library undergoing a transformation, yet again, in order to remain relevant and to demonstrate our value. Our staff have accomplished much, beginning with the acquisition of an institutional repository in 2006. We are making every effort to bring to our faculty and students the world of information. So without pausing, I took a few screenshots, and you can tell this is why I need good staff. Look at this screenshot. Someone could do this better, not have all the tags and the stuff at the top and the bottom. That's why I need, hard skills around me. This is the library's website, and it's just the website for the Archives Research Center. And it's just meant to show you, front and focus, what we're talking about is really putting everything there, because our students, as we all know, wander into the libraries for resources as a second thought often, rather than a first. The institutional repository, we've been successful in getting scholarship was created by the faculty at Clark Atlanta University, Morehouse, and Spelman College, and the Interdenominational Theological Center, creating and putting searchable journals in our repository for them. The faculty, once they begin, some of you who are probably very successful with IR on your campuses. I don't know anyone who's perfectly successful with IR. But there are various levels of achievement that we are all experiencing with this. But engaging the faculty, once they figure out that there's a way for them to see their brilliance online, that's the hook, and they love it. They love that plum metrics thing, don't you think so? Yes. Okay. Of course, there is an early digital effort for the library. Is our participation in the HBCU Library Alliance, its digital collection. Now, I could say much about this, but I'll say just a very little. I'll say that it was a wonderful foray. I don't know how long, when did we start this? It was a long time ago, maybe 10 years. 2005 we started. And we're having challenges. I'm going to say that, and Monique and Sandra can scream at me or whatever. We are having challenges, and the challenges have to do, you have to grow these collections. And you have to move these collections onto platforms which are far more engaging to students and learners now than they have been. So this is on Content DM, and so if you know Content DM, you understand the issues. Don't tell OCLC I said that. But there are issues. But in the meantime, it is a platform there. And one of the comments I talk about in this is having staff, again, who can think outside the box. Staff who can come into the library and not wait for you to say, here's what you need to do, but staff who will bring their energies and their passion and their knowledge into that workplace and offer ideas, promote new platforms that will allow us to do a far better job of engaging with our communities. So one of those is once I got some staff and somebody said something about Olmec. I said, oh, well, what is that? And it's a wonderful thing because it began to pacify me. And they were tired of me sending messages down there saying, well, why the heck are we digitizing this cat laying on a couch? And I think Christine Wiseman is here. She's head of our digital services department. She knows that story. I couldn't figure out, why are we paying to take a picture of to digitize a cat? Because the collection, for whom I can't know I don't remember who it was, but the source of the collection was a cat lover. So there were pictures in his collections of cats. And there they were. I still have some problem with that. I think there are other ways to approach it, but I'm not the expert. But I think one other platform, Olmec, what it did for me, what they did, I don't know if they went out and found this just to help shut me down or whatever, but at least it said, okay, well, here's the digital content displayed in a way that kind of tells a story that's more user-friendly. So having staff around who understand this is extremely important, again. And so we have several collections, and we are in, that's probably the department outside of housekeeping that works the hardest in the library, I think. So that was supposed to be a joke. Of course, we have the King Collection, which was our first lesson in digitizing collections. This is a whole nother speech here. I could talk about this for certain. But it's another experience because here you have a collection, and you'll learn this, that by virtue of its license, we are not allowed to put out on the web. So how do you preserve a collection that you cannot distribute online, that you can't send out of your doors? And of course, the Tupac Amaru. Now this is the infamous content DM approach. Just to give you an idea. These learners, these young children, they are not going to put up with this. They are not. And the first time they come to our sites and they see this, I've lost them. So again, staff who have these hard skills, as far as I'm concerned, I love librarians and I will always have librarians. But I also know that I'm going to have to trade out some of those librarian slots to get the staff expertise in-house that I need so that I can deliver to these young people. In the IMLS report, how am I doing on time? Maybe 5 more minutes. Oh, that's perfect. In the IMLS report, NDP3, which is National Digital Platform 3, it just came out just this month, October. I encourage you to read that. It states that, quote, the explosion in the quantity of digital content continue to pose real concerns for institutions seeking to capture, curate, and preserve content. The challenge of digital stewardship is the challenge of managing this massively increasing volume of digital content at scale. And they add that the professional expertise required to manage digital collections is continually evolving as technology becomes more complex and embedded in the everyday work of librarians and archivists. How many of our libraries are continuing the use of the traditional model of technical services and public services? Even though the data that we diligently and routinely collect and report to NCES, to ACRL, and to our accreditation bodies about the usage and movement of our collections and services shows a changed story. Are we seeing declines in circulation of print materials, declines in ILL, increases in electronic downloads of digital content, increases in the number of seats that students feel each day and night, more requests for instruction and less requests for reserves? When, I ask, will we really react to that data? In my own library, as I watch the circulation numbers slowly decline, the call for traditional reference support decrease, the ILL numbers fluctuate, but the virtual use increase, the body count in library seats late at night exploding, and the assistance given to faculty teaching upper-level coursework becoming more of a partnership, and the need for accessing institutional histories. As I see all of these changes, we have not reflected the same on a regular basis with the way in which we work and with who is doing that work. We need to work in a manner that will allow for a better exchange of knowledge. I worry about creating pockets of knowledge among staff in the library. Doing so seems to result in less diversity of ideas, less cross-pollination of culture, creation of silos, and less impactful outcomes for the students and faculty because the merits and benefits of cross-functional solutions don't occur. Ithaca performed a survey of a group of liberal arts colleges and quantified the number and titles of positions at 40 of those schools. The positions with the largest number of staff collectively are still in access services, subject librarians, and tech. In some libraries, we may be creating and naming positions in an ad hoc manner, randomly based upon special projects and grants. Our resources may not increase at the rate that is most needed. Therefore, we will have to make the hardest decisions as we reconsider how we are staffing our academic libraries. And this will be difficult. This change is already occurring in many of our library and information schools where the newer curricula might be hard for a seasoned librarian to recognize. The mix is changing. And I believe that where it is not happening, or at least being seriously considered, that something far more disruptive will occur in our very dear and treasured legacy institutions. Our newer librarians, our emerging leaders, must be allowed to lead now. Let them grapple with artificial intelligence and health informatics and human-computer interaction. And oh yes, e-books. Thank you so much.
We have some time for questions. There is a microphone in the middle of the back of the room, and it would be great if people could use that.
Testing, okay. I had the opportunity to be a reviewer for the SACS accreditation, and some of their standards kind of keep in as far as how we need to support statistics. So what, just from what you have shared with us, how do we get the accrediting body to see that libraries are changing and should change based on standards? And I don't know if that's just too much of a question, but I'm always concerned about that because the standards are just keep as far as the data that we have to collect. So you have traditional as well as trying to be innovative, as well as trying to push the library forward, but you are being bound by these standards in which the accrediting body has not changed. And I'm talking in particular about SAC.
So I deal with SACS as well, and I would be interested in the particular category that you're getting that pushback on, and that we can substantiate it in our narratives, they'll understand. But one key point might be for more of us who feel that we are in closer touch with the realities of what's happening, that we get ourselves or get champions like us involved in the review process. Because there's nothing like having, I mean, I've certainly had several SACS teams come to our institution, because I have 4 institutions and I have to do these accreditations for each one individually. It's nothing like having a librarian come there and who is just so out of touch and trying to have them understand what you're doing. But the faculty on the team will get it. I will say that if that librarian is not current. But we've had some success. I don't have a pat answer for that, but there's a way to do it. It's the evidence. I'll talk to you about it later on. Okay. Don't you love technology? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I will repeat the question if it's not heard.
Loretta, thank you so much for those comments. They were wonderful. Mark Albert, UNCG. So here is, I'll talk loud.
Oh, Martin, this one might work. Martin, thank you.
Okay. I'll follow that one. Okay. Here's a situation that I'm often in. You know, a department head comes to me and says, well, Mary, Doris, you fill in the name, worked here 35 years and they're retiring. And of course, we need to replace them. And they bring me that job description just like it was 35 years ago when Mary or Doris started working that reserve desk there or whatever, or the checkout station, you fill in the blank. And you kind of look at them and you go, well, and they look at you with this desperation in their eyes, because they feel they have a real and pressing need there, and you can't deny it in some ways with those stats of, well, Mary checked out this many things in the reserve desk, or even if it's declining, their perception might still be there. There's lots, a lot of this is fighting the legacy of perception. And how do you begin to, do you have any thoughts about changing culture? Because that's, a underlying topic in much of what you said, changing the culture. And when, as we have wonderful library staffs that often will work for 30 or 35 years in an institution. So there is long-standing culture and huge momentum. And as leaders, we can't always just, flip that culture on a dime or do violence to that culture by saying, oh, we're going to cut that position off, we're not going to be, we can do that. Sometimes we have to do that, maybe. But are there ways of mediating and managing that culture change over time?
So that's certainly is a situation that we all, anyone in management has had to deal with. But culture change does not occur overnight. And so I think that's the first thing that those of us who are responsible for the culture, have to understand. And that it requires a very serious and ongoing and continuous effort and plan and strategy. I think it's very important for leaders to assume the role of, I want to say teachers, but the teachers just sounds a little too authoritative in this respect, but assume the role of information providers to their team. I think it's important for staff, for us to do what we can to get staff to get it, that stuff's changing. to move them to the point where they can arrive at that, whether they articulate it out loud or not, but to get them to understand that something has to change here. Then, of course, you know, there is the wonderful thing you have called authority of power to say, well, no, we're not filling that position. But it has to be followed with a plan that's articulated. Here's why we're not filling that position, here's what we're going to do. And I'm at that place at my institution now. I'm holding some critical positions, not my head of archives research, who I'd be glad to take any application. But I am holding some positions because I know that we need to look at the lay of the land, and we need to redefine and reshape. It's very important also, so again, HR does the position studies and the compensation reviews, and they do them every 5, 10, 15 years or whatever. Let them do that, but in our own shops, there's things that we can do. We can routinely look at our job descriptions and really see and mesh it with all this data that we're collecting and determine, do we have the right person doing the right thing at the right time, and do we have enough of them doing it, and what changes we can make. But it's not overnight, but it's time to start.
So we're running a bit tight for time. We'll take these 2 quick questions and then have to call it to a close.
Good afternoon. I think we're approaching the afternoon hour. Your words were very inspiring. And in thinking about Gen Z and the continuous need for change and your comments here on change, how do we as librarians evolve as well? I was speaking with some people earlier about how our titles may in some cases change. When we're looking for employment, you don't necessarily see the word librarian anymore. You see information specialist. Our books, all of mine are here right now versus in stacks. So how do we maintain some sort of stability as we're evolving and changing?
How do we maintain stability as librarians? So you mean stability in terms of the profession? Is that
In
what you're
terms of
talking?
the management, in terms of like our collections, the professions, just where do we find something to, I'm not a Gen Z, to hold on to that still tangible item, whether it's the book or cell phone or whatever, that thing which gives us stability within this profession.
So, you know, in many respects, and I'm not quite sure I'm going to get to the heart of your question, but in many respects, as much as I've talked about change, some stuff just doesn't change. We still have values in our profession. I mean, we still value the pursuit of information. We still value intellectual freedom. You know, we still value privacy rights, et cetera. And I think those are the things that we need to fight to hold on to. And less so the physical things, that book, that shelf, that card catalog, and more about the principles for this democratic society, which librarians really are all about. I mean, that's how our profession evolved. And I think it's extremely important to get back to the passion of the industry and not let formats and format types misguide us in terms of why we're here.
Hi, Loretta. Really inspiring talk this morning. I hope we're going to be able to hear it again online somewhere. I just wanted to. Right. I want to thank you for pointing out the terminology problem. And I'm a librarian. I have that MLS like you from many years ago. But I work in a library where I wish we could all be called librarians. And there's a tension because some of our so-called support staff have many more skills than our MLS librarians. Mm-hmm. The other tension we have is we work very closely with our colleagues in IT. We actually have some dotted lines going on lately. And when we describe what we do, we say, oh, we're collaborating, librarians are collaborating with technology experts. And I go, wait a minute, librarians are technology experts. So what we call ourselves and how we work with our other groups on campus, I think this is the changing culture. It's really important how we position ourselves. So any more comments you might have on that would be welcome.
No, thank you for that comment. It's much appreciated. I think it is extremely, and I'm sensitized to that. I'm not on that train that is totally wedded to the conversation around titles. Because I think the issue is much deeper than that. You know, it's just like, you know, well, okay, I won't get political. But you have to understand, you know, what's... I am. I mean, what's the really important stuff, you know? It's not the dressing. My example is the NFL kneeling is not about the kneeling. It's about social injustice. And if we really have to look, I think, deeply and put our energies where it's really going to have the greatest benefit to the communities we serve. But yes, I love librarians too. Thank you. The title, that is, yes.
That's a wonderful note to end on. Won't you all join me in thanking Loretta?